I'm Peter Reinhardt. We're back on Pizza Talk, presented by Pizza Quest with our pizza Yodis. Dan Richer of Rasa in Jersey. I was just finding out how many stops at the end of the path. If you're in New York City and you take the path, the second stop, 2-block walk, and you're there. And we got John Arena in Vegas. You got your own little that little tram that goes around the city, right?
Yeah, but I don't know anybody that's actually ridden on it.
I've ridden on it, but I've never known how to get from that to your restaurants.
You can't get there from there.
Yeah, that's why I invented taxis and Ubers. And then there's Brian Spangler in Portland, Oregon, at a Pizza Shoals, who just took us on a journey of how he makes his pizzas. What would you call it? The plain pizza? Is that what you call it, Brian?
I call it plain pie.
Plain pie.
For
with
me,
sliced cheese, sauce, and then fresh cheese on top. Loved it.
Yeah.
So Dan, now we're going to visit with Dan in his kitchen. And is this your home kitchen, Dan?
This is my home.
This is your home. Wow, thank you for bringing us into your home. And you're going to do a couple things with us today. You're going to show us, since we've been talking a lot about natural fermentation, you've got a starter going, right?
Yeah.
And so you're going to be feeding the starter, and then you're also going to make us a pizza?
Yeah, I got a ball of dough that I made maybe 4 days ago. It's been sitting in the refrigerator. It's geared towards the home oven, so it bakes at a lower temperature, so it's a much higher hydration. And this is all commercial yeast and no starter.
Okay. So while you're working on it, Brian and John, feel free to throw in questions. We'll pepper Dan with questions along the way to learn what his thinking is as he's doing it, and sort of the ideas that drove this pizza.
Okay, I have a question. Dan, you said that you're doing higher hydration for your home oven?
Yeah.
Why is that?
Longer bake time.
Lower temperature, longer bake time. It's super airy, light, crisp. It's incredible. It's such a good, if you can work with high hydration doughs, it makes the best pizza that I've ever made in my home oven.
What's high hydration for you?
This is about 80.
80%. So it's kind of like a ciabatta dough.
Yes.
Sticky,
yeah,
a little sticky and tricky to work with.
Yeah, and it's so easy. You mix it with a bowl and spoon, let it sit out for 2 to 4 hours for bulk fermentation. Do a stretch and fold every hour, and then put it in the refrigerator. And then the following day, when you wake up, do a stretch and fold. When you go to bed, you do a stretch and fold, and then divide it. And then the following day, it's good to use. So it's like a total of 15 minutes worth of work over 3 days. There's no mixer. Like, I don't have to take out my mixer. Anyone can do it with a bowl and spoon, a little bit of commercial yeast, and any flour works for it.
Now, how soon after you divide them around can you use it?
You can use it in 2 to 4 hours afterwards if you keep it at room temp. But I throw it back in the refrigerator and let it sit overnight, and it just relaxes like crazy. Because it's such a high hydration, it's inherently so extensible.
Right.
That, if you can work with it, and if you're very gentle with it, it makes just really incredible pizza.
Well, since you do those stretch and folds throughout, how does the dough change? Does it get firmer and easier to handle with each round?
It does.
Cool.
Yeah, and because it has that long fermentation, the gluten is developed naturally,
Right.
Without much mechanical intervention. It's so easy for anybody to do. That's why I'm working on it. Anyone can make this if you have a bowl and a spoon. It does require a pizza stone or a pizza steel. It's really difficult to get a crispy crust any other way.
Right. Well, why don't you go ahead and put it together while we're talking? And
So
we'll
before we do that, I'm just going to feed the starter. I've had this starter since, I cultivated the wild yeast that I had on wheat that I had grown for me here in New Jersey about 12 years ago. I brought this one home during the quarantine because we shut the restaurant down for about a month, and I needed to keep it alive. But now that we're back open, I haven't fed it in about a week. And it's been at room temperature, which is not ideal. So I'm taking those circumstances into my formula. You know, I'm not going to feed it the same way that I feed a fully mature starter that I'm going to use in 4 hours or 8 hours.
Right.
I'm going to use an obscenely small amount of it and keep the inoculation really low.
What's the aroma like, Dan?
Alcoholic.
Hooch.
Pooch.
As you start to slur your words, we'll know how strong it is. Yeah. Also, has it broken down as far as the is it kind of more mushy than normal?
Oh yeah, yeah. There's no gluten
enzyme.
left in
The
it.
protease enzymes are breaking all that shit.
Yeah, like you're saying, the protease enzymes have eaten up the proteins, and the acids are eating them up as well.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah.
why just a little bit. You're just using a small, tiny little bit of that as a seed to create a new mother starter.
Yeah.
There you go.
And we're always trying to reduce the acidity in it.
What kind of flour now?
So this is called River Valley Community Grains. It's a really small company, like micro plots of wheat here in New Jersey. This is warthog wheat, so it's a specific variety of wheat also. This is not what we normally feed it, but I have a bag of it, so I'm gonna feed it, especially being as though it needs nutrients. Okay, so the wholer the grain, the more the nutrients there are going to be. So this was the perfect use for this flour at this particular moment. If I'm going to go make pizza with it, I probably wouldn't have used this. I would use something else, still organic and still on the wholer side, like a high extraction. I love T85 wheat for pizza making and for feeding starters in general. Where a lot of that bran is sifted out, but you still have a lot of nutrients for the.
So for folks who don't know what you mean when you say T85, you're talking. It's not the same as white flour. It's flour that's been sifted somewhat, but not all the sifting. Not all the bran has been sifted out.
Yeah, it's just the large, sharp particles of bran that's been sifted out.
The higher the number you go on type flours, the more germ and bran is included. It's not as extracted as much. So like type 70 versus type 85 versus type 110. The higher you go, the more germ and bran is not extracted from the flour.
Yeah.
I see.
Yeah,
I think we're hearing a lot of the sort of new generation of pizza operators are doing more of the type 85 and the coarser flour than the pure white flour, the patent flour, as we call it.
Yeah.
Seems like.
Great flavor.
Yeah. There's just more flavor.
Yeah. Oh, totally.
How much water?
It's hard to get the textural component. If you're looking for crispy, you have to do the balance of the hydration because all that germ and bran absorbs and retains that moisture, so it'll affect the product and the final result. So it's kind of like a balancing act of getting the flavor, but also depending on what textural component you're looking for.
Totally. And it ferments faster also. So if you feed a starter or if you make a
minimum dude.
Yeah.
So you got some flour in there. About how much did you put in?
I'm doing 10% inoculation. So it's 10 grams of the old starter and then 100 grams of flour because that's all that was in the bag and 100 grams of water. I kept the water at a higher temperature than normal because I really want to encourage the yeast to do their thing metabolically.
So it's kind of like lukewarm, would you say?
Yeah, it's about 100 degrees.
Uh-huh.
So if my room temperature right now is probably in the low 80s because I have the oven on. I've had the oven on for about an hour and a half preheating. So my room temperature is pretty warm. That means my flour temperature is going to be pretty warm. And this should end up somewhere in the high 80s or low 90s, which is that's my goal, right? Because I really want to encourage that yeast fermentation as opposed to favoring all the acidity that's in
Right. It's promoting more lactic acid than it is acetic acid.
Yeah, we really want to encourage that. We want to encourage the yeast to be
creamy on the tip. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So even before that lactic acid really starts being produced, I'm going to feed it again.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Because I really I'm all about favoring the yeast right now, and I'm going to put that yeast in the perfect position to thrive.
Yeah.
And then we're going to make it up.
That's one thing a lot of people don't think about when it comes to using sourdough naturally leavened, is that every action has a reaction. Your
Totally.
feed schedule, the temperature, the hydration rate, the rate that you feed it, how high you feed it. All these things affect the acetic and lactic acid production. And I don't know anybody who wants to create battery acid in their pizza.
It's not delicious.
What do you guys consider
It's all you can fucking taste.
when you're feeding this? How long after you feed it are you ready to use it?
So it depends.
Yep.
This I have no idea. I have absolutely no idea because it hasn't been fed in about a week. So I will wait for gas production to really happen before I feed it again. And as soon as I start to see like vigorous gas production, I'll feed it again, and then I'll probably wait about 8 hours or 12 hours, depending on, if I'm home. And then I'll feed it again.
In the day-to-day of your operation, when you come in to make dough, how soon do you feed it before you use it?
Okay, so we're on about a 12-hour feeding schedule. It's a little bit off balance just because of our opening hours. We feed it when we get there, and then we feed it later at night. Mm-hmm. Now, some of the different doughs that we talked about earlier that we do, like today at the restaurant, what they're doing is the first dough that we're making today, we're using the starter that was fed the previous night. Okay. Our typical is to feed it first thing in the morning. We wait 2 to 3 hours, and then we mix the dough with that young starter, that young levain. Okay, which gives us a lot more flexibility with timing because we're using such a low acid, younger levain. Gives us just a bigger window of usability. But today we're doing 3 different batches, so we have just wildly different products that are going to come out. But our guests won't know that there's any difference.
Hey, Dan, could you do me a favor and hold that starter up closer to the camera for a second so that everybody can see kind of how wet? It's really like almost like what we would call a pouliche if it was made with just water and flour and yeast. But it's wet and spongy. So you're working with a sponge starter. And then in a few hours, there you go. And in a few hours, that's going to gas up, and then you'll feed it again. Yeah. And then I'll probably do one more feeding before I actually mix dough with it, because we want that yeast to be so vigorous that it is able to leaven a larger batch of dough. That's a great idea. Well, why don't we do this? Since you got that going, and it's going to take a few minutes to get the pizza stuff. Well, why don't we take a little break right here? We'll come back and we'll spend the rest of our time with you making a pizza out of that in a home oven, a great home baked pizza. And this is not only for the home bakers that are watching, but even pizza operators all make pizzas at home too. And we'll see if we can pick up a few tips from Dan Richer when we come back in the next segment of Pizza Talk, presented by Pizza Quest. We're with our Pizza Yodis, Ryan Spangler, John Arena, and Dan Richer. Thanks. We'll see you in a few minutes. Well, Dan Richer is going to be making his own pizza at home. I've got my little loaf of sourdough bread that a neighbor of mine has made, a husband and wife team who were looking to actually get into the sourdough business of making small loaves on a subscription basis. I tasted this. It is fantastic. Of course, once you get hooked on the complexity of flavors that you get from sourdough, it's just intoxicating. So it's so hard to get back. We're with our Pizza Yodis here on Pizza Talk. I'm Peter Reinhardt. We've got Brian Spangler, John Arena, Dan Richer. Dan is already kind of taken us through his sourdough starter from sort of seed up, building it back up. And now he's going to make a pizza for us without natural leaven, but using yeast, but baked in a home oven that has had a nice long 3-day fermentation. And Dan, why don't you take it away and show us, some of your techniques? By the way, this is a recipe that you're working on for your upcoming book, right?
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah, which will be out in 2021. So about a year, a little
So
over a
don't
year.
ask us for the recipe here. Look for the book, but we'll keep you posted as soon as we know that when the publication date of that book. It's going to be a fall 2021, but we'll let you know so that you can get it. But take notes.
Yeah, so I've been doing a lot of recipe testing for the book, and that's where this dough comes from. This has been in my refrigerator for about 5 or 6 days, unfortunately. Or fortunately, I'm trying to see how long I
We're going to
can
find
push
out.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not unprecedented. There's a lot of pizza doughs that are 5-day fermentation.
I think for
How
the
bubbly
home baker, actually producing dough and letting it slowly ferment in the refrigerator is actually to their advantage rather than pressing this ambient fermentation that people always ask me about. It's like, man, how much time do you have in your fucking day?
Well, I guess what's really being tested is the tolerance of the protease enzymes, before they start to tear the thing apart.
Start breaking it down and turning it into liquid, right? So but for the average person, like what John does at Metro, which is, if I had the space, I would love to do this. Let it do its course over the 4 or 5 days, probably optimal. What would we say, John? You say it's optimal at the 4-day mark?
I like the 5-day, really.
5 days.
It's usable. It's usable after 2 days, but I would never do that.
Right.
But,
it doesn't spring up. It doesn't get that nice caramelization.
Yeah, I think 4 to 5 days is the sweet spot.
Right.
And everything we do is calculated to that. But like you said, Brian, for a home baker, as long as they have the patience to wait and the pre-planning to make it in advance, it's really optimal because you have a lot of control over it.
Right.
You ball it, you put it away, and you leave it alone.
Yeah.
You come back 5 days later.
Right. Time is your friend. Well, Dan, that you told us the last time we were all together that this is about 80% hydration. It's a very sticky dough, but it's been stretched and folded a few times over a couple of days. So it does look kind of sticky right now. How do you handle that sticky dough?
Gently as hell.
All right. Show us.
Super gentle.
Yeah. Treat it like a woman.
I hear the what do they call it, the politically correctness team coming in for us.
Yep, sorry. Yeah, so I'm flouring both sides, and I am just barely touching this. This is going to be interesting.
Okay, can you get either get the camera closer so we can really see up close on that? There you go. Now,
Brian, you're not going to be doing any pizza acrobatics with that one. Dan.
That's good, Dan.
You want me to pop and lock?
Yeah, could you do that?
I don't know how to do that.
That sticky dough is a little hard to toss for sure. But so you basically just kind of floured your hands up and then transferred it onto a floured peel.
Yep. And I'm using rice flour.
The great thing about higher hydrated doughs is that it's because it's so relaxed. You get the oven spring. The oven spring is everything. Oven, and you get
Somebody have a radio going in the background, or some voices.
What's that? Hang on one second.
Hearing that sounds. Oh, we're gonna shut doors.
But what I was saying is, like,
The noise of Zoom conferencing is it's live and unedited.
It's all good.
So
a higher hydrated dough, it's more extensible, it's more relaxed. You want your dough to be relaxed when it goes into that spring is everything. It'll create the crunch. It'll actually dictate how the crust performs as well. And a lot of people, the most common mistake that a lot of people make when they're learning is forcing the issue, like doing it too early. Under
it's hard to wait sometimes.
Or it's they've kind of refolded it, everything's tight. The final fermentation happens in the oven, so you want it to be relaxed so that when the steam is being generated, during the baking process, and also the yeast is still alive up until about 130 degrees Fahrenheit. That's when your final fermentation happens. That's where you get the nice spring that affects not only the crumb but the crust.
Well, while you've been saying that, Brian, and watching Dan, you've got, looks like a couple kinds of cheeses on there.
Yep. Let me just pop this in the oven before
Okay.
it gets to the board.
Okay. And I'm guessing that you probably have that oven cranked up as high as it'll go, huh?
Yeah. So I preheated as hot as it would go, which is 550. And then about 10 minutes before I loaded, I cranked on the broiler.
Yeah.
Smart.
And the broiler's still on right now.
That's a great trick. By the way, have you experimented between the differences of baking on a stone versus a steel?
You know, I swore off stones after my second one broke.
Yeah.
So I only have a steel at this point.
That's kind of what happened to me too. I switched over. So you're on a steel. You're on a baking steel right now, huh?
What's that?
You're on a baking steel now. You're baking on the steel now.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so in a future episode, we're going to have Andres Logston, who basically invented the baking steel. We're going to have we'll have a show with him, and he'll tell us all about the story of sort of the ideation behind that concept and how it really has really revolutionized, I think, home baking, and a lot of professional restaurants are using it.
For sure.
Totally.
Because, all these baking stones are high-density composite refractory. So they take a long time. They're very dense. They take a really long time to heat up. Mm-hmm. And then when you put something wet on top of it, it strips a ton of energy away from it.
Yeah.
And it takes that much longer for it to rebound. Whereas metal is conductive. It makes perfectly good sense to only go with metal as your baking performance.
It's amazing. It took us so long to figure that one out, but thankfully you did. So the pizza's in the oven, baking at about 550 for, you thinking, what, about 4 or 5 minutes?
I think this is probably going to go for about 8.
Oh, that long, huh? It really takes that long, because you have all that hydration. But it's that high hydration that allows it to endure the oven for that long.
Right.
Yeah. And it gets super crispy. It should be very bubbly. Going back to the steel versus the stone. So obviously we have a wood-fired oven, so it's stone. And
that's a
I do see differences in the underside of the pizza between steel and stone. I don't know about in a home oven, but our wood-fired oven, I mean, it just feels different because the stone is almost, it's textured because it's a natural material. So the way the crust lands into it definitely, there is a difference.
Yeah.
But every oven's going to be different.
Yeah.
Because it's porous, it actually it absorbs moisture out of the crust, whereas steel doesn't have that propensity.
Yeah.
Well, I noticed that, like, in my oven, and every home oven especially bakes differently. I've got an electric GE, an old 35-year-old GE oven that I inherited with my house. And I found when I was baking with the stone, and I had like about a 3/4 inch to 1 inch thick pizza stone, I would bake on the lower shelf in order to get a lot of bottom heat. And then when I moved to the steel, it's thinner and it absorbs heat so quickly that if I baked on that shelf, my undercrust would tend to burn before the top of the pizza. So I moved it to the top shelf, and now I'm baking on the top shelf. And then, of course, I love the trick that you have, and a lot of people are using this now, of putting the broiler on to really blast the top of that stone or steel right before you put the oven. But then you got to remember to go back to bake before you put the pizza in. Because one time I forgot to do that. Very quickly, we had a big smoke fire going.
You know that they're making silicone wedges to keep your oven door open, so you keep your broiler on now for this pizza making?
That's a great idea. Well, you got to get one of those.
Because it'll shut off. It's got a safety mechanism that's going to shut down.
The door closes. Yeah. No,
silicone wedges to keep the door open that allow the heat to keep.
I didn't even know about that. That's really cool.
Yep.
So then, this is basically a sauce and cheese pizza that you've got going. Do you put anything else on it when it comes out, or how do you finish it off?
So this one is probably not even going to be edible, but we'll see.
Is that possible? Is it actually
I'm preparing
possible
for the
to
worst.
pizza-
I'm preparing for the worst.
Why do you say that?
I don't think we're going to get the crust coloration that we're looking for.
Do you think it's over fermented?
I do, yeah.
So can you explain again for people who are not up on sort of baking science why an over fermented dough wouldn't brown up as well as the properly one?
There really needs to be some residual sugar left in the dough for full, deep, dark caramelization, which is what I'm looking for. The yeast consumes all that sugar, and if it consumes too much of it, there just won't be enough left for caramelization.
Right.
And then it creates a lot of excess alcohol too, I suppose.
Yeah. And the the thing with pizza making is you have to balance the bake time with all of your other ingredients. So our cheese is starting to break almost at this point, where it's just been in the oven too long.
The cheese is doing that, but the dough is still not brown.
Yeah, we're getting a little bit of browning, but it should be out of the oven at this point.
Right.
And there's ways to control that. Like I could have used cold cheese. I could have used cheese that was sliced bigger.
Uh-huh.
There are ways to control that and manipulate it. And that's
Well,
one of the things that I love about pizza making is it's so forgivable, but you just have to have a lot of dough on hand to make all those mistakes.
That's it. I mean, especially if you're like throwing a little pizza party for friends, you always want to consider the first one to be like the first pancake, a little sacrificial, and then
Absolutely.
you dial in everything after that.
Yeah. And listen, I've been making pizza since 2003, and this is an epic failure. And I am completely okay with that. Like, it's okay to fail because you learn something, and I love learning. Every pizza is just that opportunity for learning and growth and development, and we should never be afraid of failure or making a mistake or just making bad pizza. It's okay, because even bad pizza is pretty good.
In this particular, even bad pizza is good pizza. But in this instance, okay, what are some of the key takeaways then from your quote epic fail?
So this dough should not be used after day 4 in the refrigerator without corrections. corrections. I could have given it a shorter room temp fermentation before it went into the refrigerator, but really day 4 is its max. And in the book, I'll recommend don't keep it over day 4. And anyone who's watching this will read that sentence and know that it came from this failure. And I love failing because it's always an opportunity.
We've talked about that in other episodes, how important failing is in order to ultimately.
It's the only way you learn.
How close are you to it being done? We're not going to be too ashamed to dive into even a failed pizza here. Can you hold it up to the camera? We can't quite see it.
Yeah.
There we go. Okay. So it looks like
these areas, right? So the cheese is starting to break in areas. Cheese is an emulsion, and we still don't have this crust.
Yeah, you're oiling out.
Can you see me?
Yeah.
So there's. Oh, we just lost Dan. So there you're back. So is it pretty crisp though? Is it baked but not caramel? Looks pretty done. Yeah. So what we're seeing is the result of an over fermented dough because there was not enough residual natural sugar. There was no sugar in the recipe, but the sugar in the wheat got eaten up by the yeast, and therefore it's not going to taste as sweet and it's not going to caramelize as well. And yet it's still going to be a pizza.
Yep.
Want to take a bite and just give us like a sensory report on it as well?
Yep. So I think that evaluation is super important when we're doing test recipes like this, and on a daily basis. We're always evaluating our pizzas from the oven spring, which you can see is
Nice.
not bad.
No, it's nice.
No, that's actually very attractive.
Yeah.
If it had only given us the color, we would have been very happy.
The tag.
Yeah.
How's it taste?
Crust is a little bit too difficult to chew through because it spent a little bit more time in the oven, but it's pretty good.
See, that's the nice thing about pizza. It's never really an epic fail.
I don't know if you can see.
That is like your ciabatta structure there, which I like. I'm always looking for that in my pizzas. I'd rather see wide, large open holes than the real tight holes, just because I know we were going to get maximum flavor from the wheat itself.
And better texture.
So with the higher hydration, you're speeding up the fermentation rate, because that's an effect. And then I was just on a conversation with Falco this morning talking about why old school pizza producers used to include sugar in their dough, and I called it a CYA. You guys know what a CYA is, right?
For the sake of those who don't.
That's covering your something.
Yeah, covering.
Because the Maillard effect, you need to have the prevalence of both sugars and proteins for things to brown. That's how it works. So a CYA in the old dough method, from the 50s and what have you, the old school method it was under fermented or over fermented. There was still a prevalence of sugar with the proteins that allow it to brown.
So that it was like a safety net.
Yeah, like a CYA.
Yeah.
But if with Dan's point, because it's not adding sugar, so the amylase enzymes are what you rely upon to convert the complex protein starches into simple sugars. That's their sole purpose, which gives food to the yeast. But if you over ferment or under ferment, there's an imbalance between the proteins and the sugars.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Over fermenting, all those sugars have been consumed by the yeast. And
yeah. So I could have added some malt to it, diastatic malt powder,
Sure.
and that frees up a little bit more sugar. So if I added diastatic malt powder, then I could probably get away with another day or two. Yay.
There's another trick. Yeah, another bakery. Well, these are things that we can talk about the next time we gather, because this is an endless, fathomless subject. And I think that the fact that even the three of you who have been doing this for a long, long time and are experts are still learning new tricks all the time. And I've been doing it for not quite as long as John. John's been in the game even longer than me, but I've been doing it long enough to think that, I know a lot of what's out there, but then we always are learning new things. And I think this is what's the value of getting our Yodis together, because we want to share this with the next generation. And so I want to thank the three of you for joining us on Pizza Talk today, and adding to our sort of ongoing encyclopedia of knowledge for our viewers. And Brian, did you have another thing to say, or was that a wave?
Yeah, I want to say, if you're not failing, you're not learning, and if you're not learning, you're failing.
Yeah, and I think also if you're not learning something every time you touch a dough ball, you missed a tremendous opportunity.
Right.
Yeah.
And
every day I walk in, I learn something new. Even though it's Groundhog's Day for a lot of my business, because again, everybody expects, what I do.
Yeah.
There's always, I'll just leave it at that. If you're not failing, you're not learning, and if you're not learning if you're not failing. So.
And when John said every time you touch the dough, it's an opportunity, it reminded me that this is where the learning really happens, right? It's these hands.
What did we say before? Like, it's like, let the dough talk to you. Like, the dough is always talking to you. You have to listen to it. Let it tell you what it wants and what it doesn't want. And that's where the most complicated element of this business and trying to consult and teach people is that they're like, so is it ready? I'm like, yes, it's ready. But teaching the baker's touch, teaching them to learn from their failures when it's ready, it's one of the hardest things to do.
Yeah, I was really impressed with the way Dan responded to the conditions of that dough on the table, the way he used his hands. You know, his hands were automatically adjusting, just
Totally.
naturally adjusting to what the dough was telling him what it wanted.
Yeah.
Right.
And he was answering it back through his hands. So that was really a great demonstration, Dan.
Well,
And I'm always,
when it's super cold and tight, you have to, massage it differently than when it's really warm and really extensible. You gotta tell you what it wants.
well, there it is. So maybe one of the big takeaways for today is listening to your dough is a big part of growing in this craft.
Yeah.
So please, we want to get you guys back again and keep this thing going. And we'll even add some new Yodis to our Yodi panel over time and get you all in at different times in different combinations. But we'll have you back soon. And we want to invite you to join us. And remember, we're going to be posting regularly a few times a week. So join us on Pizza Talk, presented by Pizza Quest. Thank you to John, Brian, and Dan, our Pizza Yodis. We'll see you all next time. Thanks.
Love you guys.
Thanks, guys.